Okay, well, hopefully the majority have joined that are due to join. I'm sure we'll have other people joining us during the course of this session. Today, we've got a fantastic topic, one that I've been particularly keen to cover, given the discussions that have been taking place over the last 12 months across the industry, looking at AI, Gen AI, and the C-suite, revolutionizing decision-making process. Got four fantastic panelists, I have to say. I'm very excited. Each one of them genuinely are passionate about this topic, so it's going to be a really enjoyable chat. Quick introduction to the Barnt Partnership for those who haven't come across the organisation before. Quick 2-second introduction, of course. I founded the company 16 years ago. We're just shy of 100 people now globally. I think what distinguishes the proposition is the fact that we look at strategy through to execution. Strategy being the niche focus for what we do. 4 key areas that we look at: strategy and M&A, digital data and analytics, ESG, sustainability, transformation and change, across all core markets, including public sector, private equity, financial services, consumer, healthcare, life sciences, industrial, etc. as well. The end-to-end talent solution aspect of the proposition is unique in the marketplace. We look at all aspects of how we can support our clients with talent solutions, from consulting services, outcome-based fractional consulting, through to independent consulting, which is our interim practice. And of course, at the heart of our business is our permanent search practice, our retained search practice. The Barnt Partnership was recognized this year by Forbes as one of the world's best management consulting firms. We're very proud of that. We've also been recognized by the Financial Times for the depth and benchmark of our consulting network. We have over 8,500 independent consultants curated into our network, and that's been recognized by the Financial Times. And we very much have a global reach, and this is one of the aspects I'm most proud of, with offices in London, New York, Paris, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Sydney. Sydney through our partners at 325. And what that gives us now, it really is that global reach to support, multinational organizations, private equity firms, financial services companies, professional services companies in their talent solution scenarios. And so to the panel today, and as I say, really genuinely excited about the 4 that we have. Let me quickly run through and introduce each and every one. Sanjeevan Bala is the Group Chief Data and AI Officer with ITV, the broadcaster in the UK. Sanjeevan is a leading expert in AI strategy and a pioneer in the use of data to drive business innovation and growth. As Group Chief Data and AI Officer at ITV, Sanjeevan has assumed a pivotal role in shaping the future of one of the leading media and entertainment companies, and was recently honoured with the prestigious title of Most Influential Person in Data by IQ 100. Sanjeevan, great to have you with us. Beth Pollack. Beth, great to have you. Thank you. Operating Partner, Applied AI and Data Strategy with Decision Science Network. She's based in New York. Beth is an applied AI and data strategy operating partner with 20+ years experience designing and building decision systems. An evangelist for the power of data to drive value creation and superior decision making. She partners with deal teams and portfolio companies to drive top-line growth, create efficiencies, and achieve scale through AI data, science product, and data monetization initiatives. Previous to launching Decision Science Advisor, she led AI and data value creation efforts at Operating Advisor for an $80 billion through Warburg Pincus. Prior to that, she led operational-oriented investment decision-making systems through financial institutions, including private equity firm Littlejohn. She first developed her data and product operating acumen, managing risk and building system decisions at Goldman Sachs. Beth, great to have you with us. Thank you. Saka from San Francisco has joined us today. Fantastic. It's 7 a.m. in San Francisco. Saka is Innovation Transformation and Product Leader with Unlock Ventures. He's a seasoned corporate innovation, new product development, and digital transformation expert with over a decade of experience at PwC. And as the former Global FS New Ventures Leader at Hitachi Vantara, where he specialized in AI and intelligent automation. He's currently as growth and transformation leader at Unlock Ventures, where he provides strategic guidance and advisory services on enterprise AI, growth strategies, and digital transformation for major organizations. Saka, great to have you along. Last but not least, Lisa Weaver-Lambert is private equity, data and AI lead at Microsoft. Now, Lisa, at the moment in her current role, she partners with investment firms to drive growth by modernizing technology, data, and AI capabilities. Previously, she worked for Accenture's strategy and architecture practice in private equity as data and digital director. She's held various positions, senior roles across multiple sectors for companies, including Coca-Cola, Tesco, Virgin, Pfizer, Santander, Lloyds, American Express. And she's currently writing a book, AI Decoded, a practical guide aimed at non-technical executives and board members. Lisa, thank you for joining us today. So let me stop sharing profiles. Let me come to main screen. And there we have our panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, for those that have joined us today, it's good to see you. We've had one of the largest signups today for our webinars, which is fantastic. And I think very apt given the nature of the discussion today. I do want to try and make this interactive. If you do have questions, do pose them in the chat room if it's relevant to the question at hand. We have some questions to go through, obviously, but if you do have any questions for the panelists, do pose it in the chat room. If I can integrate it, I will. If not, there will be a recording to share after this. And of course, we will look to follow up directly with you as well. So let's run into this. First question. So there's been a lot of work around this. Obviously, everyone's talking about the impact of AI, decision-making process. ChatGPT has reached over 100 million users in just over 2 years. You're looking at Baird, Claude, Midjourney, and other content creating tools. This is leaving CEOs understandably wondering, is this a game-changing opportunity? How do we embed it into the business? What impact is it going to have to my organization? So really, we're going to be looking at that today. And we've got, as I say, 4 fantastic panelists. So question one. And question one will be going to Beth, as Beth was the first person to join the panel today. So Beth, the first question will be, how will generative AI impact industries and organizations in the short and long term? And do boards possess the necessary technical expertise to navigate these challenges effectively? Beth, your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's generative AI is real. It will have a real impact. I think execution is the biggest challenge, as it is with all machine learning and data initiatives. I think it has potential to evolve work, the way we make decisions and how we provide value to our customers. I also think it has massive, potential for risk for modifying the competitive landscape. And so I think that's something that, it's really important that the board is aware of, the competitive pressures that can arise, as well as the opportunities for efficiency and for decision making. Do we have the right skills at the board level to make that call? I would say generally diversity in boards could be better, and that includes with data acumen. I think, like we mentioned Lisa's book, I think like the importance of making sure that people stay educated is critical.
And given the challenges around that aspect, and by that I mean how new this topic is, and how fast moving it is, that ability to educate, how real is that right now? What is a definitive point of reference or a guide point that people could look at in that regard?
Yeah, no, I think it's it really all goes back to it's moving quickly, but as somebody who's been integrating and executing artificial intelligence for many years, the actual execution into companies is not going to be as fast for the most case that people believe. So I think it's important to just take a breath, think about vision, understand execution, make sure you have the right team, have external consultants until you can hire the correct internal consultants that are true advisors for you, and treat it like any other existential risk that your company might be facing.
Right. Thank you. Lisa, your thoughts on this? Again, the question being how organizations in the short and long term are navigating these challenges, and do they have the right capability? What's your experience on that, Lisa? Lisa, you're on mute. There we go. Perfect.
The short term, those companies that have already been working with AI will have a head start with generative AI. This is what we've witnessed across a number of companies. Successful companies are focused on deeply educating and empowering teams, and this is the point that Beth was making. They are using Gen AI to automate tasks such as content creation, customer service, code generation, and data analysis. Microsoft has been on an AI journey for 7 years now, focused on traditional machine learning methods. Now there are examples of AI impact across critical processes in the company with positive ROI. The time spent building the muscle to incorporate AI has prepared Microsoft well to take advantage of generative AI. In fact, our first prototypes have been on solutions such as scaling commercial contract reviews, where large language models perform well. In the long term, generative AI has the potential to really create new products and services, change how we work, and even reshape entire industries. This is a paradigm shift, and the world's largest models are now becoming platforms. This transformation is already in progress, and I think that is happening quicker than perhaps my panelist, Beth, was putting forward, as we can see that emerging in innovative startups. Take, for example, a CERN. This platform empowers investors to make decisions faster with no technical knowledge required. They can determine new sentiment around recent developments of these investments and make quick decisions with guidance from AI. Another example is Robin, which is a platform which leverages large language models to understand the content of contracts and other important documents. Otter AI is an end-to-end meeting and collaboration platform which really streamlines communications between teams. And Iterative Health is an example from the healthcare industry, which brings AI-driven computational tools to the field of gastroenterology. These examples underscore, in fact, that generative AI is not a future concept, but is transforming industries. And the pace of this transformation is accelerating. One CEO of a startup recently emphasized this to me, Nick. It's quoting basically that these changes are now occurring every quarter and not just annually. For the timeline of innovation now has contracted significantly. So effectively using these changes requires expertise at all levels of the organization, including the board. And while some boards may have this expertise, others may need to develop it. And this can be done in 3 ways: through recruitment, bringing in new board members with a technology background, training that we've mentioned, ensuring that people are kept up to date for the implications for the organization, and also external expertise. So establishing a board of external experts that can provide specialist knowledge and insights and be tapped into on an as-needed basis. But also importantly, for boards, they need to consider the ethical implications of AI, including data privacy, algorithm bias, and also the impact on future jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to come on to those topics, so that's very appropriate. Thank you, Lisa. Sanjeevan, what are you seeing at ITV? What are your how is the board at ITV tackling this? Obviously, I'm sure through your hands and through your expertise, but what's your view on this?
Yes, I think if you really step back and look at what the role of the board is, it's fundamentally to provide leadership in value creation and preventing value destruction. So those two really opposing ends of the spectrum, it's really kind of scrutinizing the business to kind of understand what are the opportunities for value creation and what does that look like across our entire value chain. As you think about ITV, which effectively we produce content, we promote it, we distribute it, and we monetize it. On the value destruction side of things, what you are seeing in the market is, your traditional moats that you might have as a business and the barriers to entry are radically coming down now. So where you might think the existing competitor suite sort of exists today, that's actually radically getting readdressed and redistributed in the market. So I think the dynamics of competition radically are changing. I think what's really interesting in terms of the short term versus long term is, I think the phase we're in at the moment is that sort of teenage brain sort of phase. It's very excitable. I would describe it as it's very consumer grade, effectively. And effectively, a lot of the tools that you see are solving what I call vertical business problems, right? So yes, you can get something for language translation. Yes, you can get something for this. And they're all sort of solving vertical problems. And if you listen to what the market is saying, what seems to be appearing with these foundation models is bigger is better, larger scale is better because it has quite a context to train on. And then there's emerging issues, as was mentioned, around trust, ethics. Can you trust a source? Is there proper lineage and traceability with a lot of these things? What's happening in the sort of the medium and longer term, though, I think is there will be an element of disappointment where a lot of these trials don't really render results. I think what you're then going to see is consolidation and the emergence of what I call horizontal problems that are going to be solved. Because a lot of our businesses have horizontal workflows, right? But we don't have vertical. Yes, you're solving vertical problems, but you're going to have this emergence of horizontal kind of workflows that will get addressed and fundamentally kind of evaluated. I think what's really fascinating, though, that's increasingly happening in the market, and I think Lisa touched on this a little bit, is a lot of these foundation models are what I describe as an inch deep, but a mile wide, right? They're all right at lots of things, but not brilliant at really kind of nuanced things. Most of our businesses have data and understanding that's an inch wide, but a mile deep.
Yeah.
So really, it's how do you bring these two worlds together? Because what you have in organizations is deeply embedded organizational context that's very, very business specific. If you can unlock that with the generative kind of opportunity, that's where both these things work really, really well. Another example that kind of Lisa touched on is Harvey.ai. That's a really good example of a tool that's been trained on specifically the legal context that has deep contextual understanding, and that's being deployed in a lot of the GC 100 firms across Europe. And that's where I see the market kind of playing out around how do you bring these two worlds together? How do we allow for some enterprise grade kind of solutions to emerge, and fundamentally solving horizontal problems?
Interesting. Saka, your view on this from the West Coast, I guess. Any distinction to any of the points we've heard so far?
No, I mean, everything's been covered really. The three that I will emphasize again that really resonated well with me on the board front. I mean, traditional boards have been very value creation finance oriented, and I think that there needs to be a new representation and composition which is beyond that, because part of, I think, coming into the enterprise with Gen AI or AI in any serious sort of means and mechanisms is accounting for experimentation and failure. And because boards have traditionally been so finance focused, the way they are measuring investments don't account for experimentation and failure to the degree that they need to in this sort of brave new AI world. So I think that is a very, very important aspect of the new board formation and sort of composition patterns. The other thing I'll say, also in echoance of what Sanjeevan just said, there is a Cambrian explosion right now of AI tools, but they're vastly B2C. There's a lot of platform infrastructure level pieces that we see, but they're not solving horizontal use cases of the kind that Sanjeevan mentioned. And I'm certainly seeing that with my clients. There's a lot of excitement, but how much of it is B2B? How much of it is Harvey grade? In other words, is a really important thing. And then the last one really relates to not just Gen AI, but AI in general, which is the whole problem of data. I mean, you don't have any form of anything unless your data house is in order. And I think what a lot of the Cambrian explosion is doing right now, it starts off with the focus on Gen AI, then onto AI, and then onto, oh boy, our data's, our EDM, our data ops, our data governance, data security, data privacy, data.
Yeah.
Data everywhere, but not a lot to use. Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. So I think that point is really coming forward, and which is great because that's the prerequisite to everything else.
Thank you. Okay. Well, look, let's move on to the next question here. What strategies can organizations implement, not just experiment with in terms of generative AI, but effectively harness its potential for substantial growth and innovation? Lisa, I'll start with you, if I may. Again, you're on mute. Sorry, apologies, Lisa.
Sorry. It's my advice is to focus on 4 key categories. That's the practice that we're using at Microsoft currently, which is summarizing information, generating content, recommending actions, and simplifying tasks. These are the areas where Gen AI performs best. And the potential technology impact is likely to be in key business processes, customer-facing teams, and product.
Yeah.
We'd also start with small manageable projects that allow your team to gain practical experience within a contained vertical. We've been talking about the difference between vertical and horizontal use cases. So prioritize investments on positive NPV projects that support decision-making and productivity. Thirdly, deliberate education, training, and empowerment of teams is critical in order to accelerate progress. Often companies may need to leverage external interim teams or consulting firms or other resources. Then risk management, developing very clear guidelines for the ethical use of AI. This should cover areas like data privacy, the bias, and transparency. And finally, AI needs to be part of an organization's longer-term strategy. And this involves how AI can drive innovation and growth in the long term, and how the workforce will also shift.
Thank you. Beth, I'll come to you next, if I may.
Yeah, I mean, my view on this is really just the importance of like understanding and defining a problem and trying to find one that's truly impactful. And, you know, that's maybe whether it's customer facing or efficiency oriented, and then quantifying it. And then we can roll back and we can choose proof of concepts. But I think what I've seen with AI generally, and what I think will exceptionally be true with generative AI, is that point solutions won't work here. Proof of concepts have the risk of failing. And so really engaging in a vision that's cross-organizational and getting an understanding of it, quantifying the opportunity so we understand the eye and the prize, and then working backwards to do a POC. You know, all of these things, you really need to be invested, and none of them are linear. And so you just, you know, you have to make sure people are on board and really excited about it. And you know, and I think the other big thing to take into consideration is really to think about the difference between proof of concept and production. And I think historically, the reason why proof of concepts have failed is because production is a different animal in itself, and you need to be set up a different way for it. I think there's a big risk with generative AI that you have massive spikes in cost when you try to move things into production that make them completely inefficient from a business perspective, just like we started with cloud as well. So I think all
You've
those
seen
things.
examples of that, have you, Beth?
Hmm?
You've seen examples of that, have you?
Yes, well, I mean, across portfolios, you know, in the past few years, you know, millions of dollars of accidental cloud spend. Definitely. And will that happen here with generative AI when you're not really understanding the cost of, you know, of the queries you're making when it's done at large scale, but it looks cute from a POC perspective? That will absolutely happen, you know?
Yeah.
But I think if the problem is big enough, right, and you really underwrite it and it's impactful to your company, you know, I think that's where the real opportunity is.
Thank you. Sanjeevan, you're smiling like you can relate to this.
Absolutely, Nick. I think the approach we've taken is that this transformation, the opportunity that presents itself, is going to be, you know, a human transformation in essence, right? It's going to be a people transformation and business context. So the reason I think those are really important factors is the way we're certainly looking at this, and the way approach we've taken is broadly across 3 E's effectively. So first, educate colleagues around the art of the possible, right? Because, you know, it's very easy to read something and hear about the hype, and actually it's very different for colleagues to understand actually what does this mean, what does it actually mean. And I think the reason education of colleagues is critically important in this business is that's where the business context and the ideation is going to come for actual viable solutions that can actually be used, that actually make business sense and can create value. The second then is empower. So this is everything around, when you think about the audit and risk committee, is providing the guardrails around how do you need to think about this? How do you think about IP ownership, but also IP leakage? Because fundamentally, whatever you put into these things, you need to understand what happens with it. Is it going to be used, and your IP going to be used to train wider models? What you get out of it and how you then use it, what does that mean in terms of IP representation and the exploitation of that IP? Because if you know, machine generated content can't be IP protected, well, fundamentally, you've shot yourselves in the foot, right? Because you don't have a long tail of IP exploitation. So that's the second pillar around how do you ensure that you create the environment that's empowering colleagues around the guardrails, around considerations around IP leakage and some of those things. And then the third stage is the experiment phase. And I think to Beth's point, and then what we're seeing in the market is if you go down the defensive approach all around efficiency and optimization, the chances are you're looking at kind of 1x returns, right? And there's lots of these efficiency kind of proof of concepts things you can spin up, but very few stick, and we've seen it before. And there are also lots of, you know, they're very much cost generative. Yeah. On the offensive side, it's really looking at those kind of use cases that are mapped, that are being driven by individuals and leaders in the business that really understand the business context. And what you're then looking at, and what we're certainly looking at, is what are the 10x opportunities? What are the real step change opportunities where generative and AI can absolutely drive growth? And the reason the people aspect is really critical is those leaders have to drive this change, right? There's no point in a central unit sort of mandating this across the organization because it just won't take traction. So we've really embarked on that sort of bottom up, educate and enable. So that way we can kind of get the sort of the leaders that are in the business that are running these functional units, be it marketing, be it commercial, be it content creation, that can then kind of adapt and drive the kind of use case and fundamentally deliver on those 10x returns.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just,
Lisa, please.
I just jump in on a point that Sanjeevan has made around empowering employees and letting them drive the ideas, because I think it's so important. And we have certainly seen a lot of innovation through this way of working, particularly actually in finance, where we've driven a lot of AI innovation into finance, and it's been the team within the finance function that have come up with the ideas and have actually deployed AI to specific processes that make sense in their world, in their context. I think that is such a valuable point, that this is not owned by an IT function. This has got to be pervasive across the organization.
Yeah, thank you. I understand. Saka, your view on this question?
Yeah, I mean, that last point from Lisa resonates very well with me. The new owner of this mandate is it's not clear who this person is. I mean, we've seen a plethora of the CXOs emerge over the last 2 decades. I mean, the CIO's role has been really diffused. You've got the digital officer, the data officer, the transformation officer, the innovation officer. It's a CXO Cambrian explosion unto itself. And I think the ownership piece as a way of driving within the enterprise so that it goes beyond the walls of experimentation and labs is really, really, really important here. And to that extent, I think it connects well with the previous question around board representation, because it really is top down. It really is top down, and without the sort of leadership mandate and prioritization, maybe in the transformation agenda, there's a greater traction, but in the innovation agenda, what I see from my clients is a lot of it don't believe the lab walls, and that's a really, really, really tough problem to solve unless the leadership is firmly behind it. In terms of strategies, the upskilling piece is very important. A lot of my clients are in professional services. They're in tax, they're in accounting, they're in market research, they're in law. And the new professional service worker is really a new AI digital expert who has domain expertise. That is the future. And you can't, I mean, I don't know what's happening in the UK, but in the US, there is such a shortage of people like accountants. This is one industry where there are absolutely more jobs than there are graduates. And you know this, running Barton.
Yeah.
And so clearly AI, Gen AI is the future for a lot of these industries. And so if you can't hire fast enough, you're gonna have to upskill fast enough.
Yeah.
And so in terms of enterprise strategies, that's a really big piece that I think I'm seeing a lot of my clients invest a lot of resources.
And we are going to touch upon that, because you're right, that talent perspective is a key driver in this as well. So Saka, I'm going to come back to you on that one. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. And Saka, I will start with you on this next question. How are organizations balancing ethics and value creation with adequate risk management? I know Lisa's touched upon this. This is an important question from her perspective. But Saka, what's your view on that? How are organizations balancing ethics and value creation with adequate risk management? And this goes to a question we've also had from one of our attendees today as well, around the threats and opportunity assessments that could be employed. I
mean, if anything, right now there's a throttling of value creation because of this particular issue, right? There is a worry on the known and more importantly, the unknown risks. CSOs, CIOs, I see quite a bit of, this is really great, but how do I get started, and what do I really have to worry about? I see a lot of worry about, the headline sort of issues around OpenAI getting sued for monetizing others' content. There's a lot of issues around data privacy and getting enterprise data up into these, public foundation models. And so the balance, I think, at the end of the day, a lot of it goes back into the particular objectives and metrics that you're starting off with, and the sort of comprehensive risk assessments and the risk mitigation strategies that are being done in light of the smaller start off with a lot of these AI and Gen AI efforts. Regulatory, I think, is a really important piece too. I mean, not just the GDPRs, but in the US here, you've got states like California passing CCPA, you've got Virginia and Texas passing their own data privacy laws. And so there's a key consideration around the regulatory compliance of the data vis-a-vis the AI initiatives that are happening. Again, on the Gen AI front, a lot of this has yet to, from at least from my client set, has yet to leave the experimentation phase, and so it doesn't have the enterprise grade robustness that that we would expect. But those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
Thank you, Sanjeevan. Your thoughts on this from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's been really interesting is the kind of the alignment with sort of your risk appetite with the organizational kind of values, because I think what starts to get codified very much is, you know, your appetite to risk organizationally. I think one dimension depends on how regulated or less regulated you might be. So I think about pharma or FS, for example, heavily regulated, and therefore risk appetite is definitely seen differently. I think what's been really interesting is that whole thing between kind of the regulatory stick and therefore compliance versus the kind of the values carrot and the opportunity, and how do you sort of drive the right organizational behavior. I think on the risk side of things, what's been really interesting, certainly organizationally, we have an ethics director, and we certainly have, you know, audit and risk committees, it's that understanding of how you articulate the risk, the scale of that impact, and then the likelihood. And as you're doing those assessments, what becomes very apparent actually is it's how do you help the business leaders understand the sort of the various degrees of risk, and then how do you empower the business to then make that decision around, actually, this is going to be an innovation we're going to get behind, and we need to get comfortable with this level of risk. And it's that understanding of the risk, I think, is really critically important. And I think the more you can do to kind of educate sort of business leaders around what that looks like, and in particular the likelihood of that happening, gets really interesting for me. And I think one of the things that's happening in the market certainly is you know, a lot of these foundation models, they're underwriting kind of copyright infringement, that sort of thing, right? So a lot of them now are sort of saying, look, don't worry, use our tools, we'll underwrite everything. Well, for a brand like us, well, that's fine in terms of financial protection, but what about brand protection? Because, you know, once you've been found of, you know, perhaps alienating copyright, and your brand's out there and liable for it, it's all very well you can get financial protection, but the brand reputational damage, that's quite material, right? So I think we've still got a journey to go on around how we think about some of these risks, how we think about sort of the underwriting aspect, and what does it mean for a brand, and how do you align sort of your risk appetite with your values? And I think that's the key thing that'll help organizational navigate and weave a path through this.
Lisa, your view on this?
The context in which I'm working at the moment, this is taken extremely seriously, and taking a proactive approach to this balance between ethics and risk management can be viewed in sort of six areas. The first point is really to establish clear ethical guidelines. This is AI that aligns with the organization's values and principles, and I think we've been hearing that through the panel this afternoon. This includes consideration around fairness, reliability, safety, privacy, security, transparency, and accountability. The second point is to integrate ethics into the design process. Ethics needs to be considered at every stage of AI development, from the initial design to deployment and monitoring. And this can also help identify and mitigate potential risks early on. Thirdly, risk management. Regular assessments can help the organization understand the potential impacts of AI applications. This not only includes technical risks, but also ethical risks, such as bias and privacy concerns. The fourth area is transparency. So being transparent about how the AI system works, the data that is being used, and the decisions that are made off this data. This helps build trust with stakeholders and also allows for better oversight. The fifth point is continuous learning and improvement within the organization, as AI is a rapidly developing field, so updating practices on new research, regulation, and societal expectations. And the final point is around collaboration and engagement, so engaging within a wide range of stakeholders, including employees, customers, regulators, and the wider public. And this can provide valuable insight and input, the different perspectives, once they are all considered.
Thank you. Beth, your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, listen, risk management is my expertise. You know, I think that how I try to think about this is just really bringing it down to practical examples, so people can, you know, not theoretical, people can really understand what the risks are. And there's all kinds of different risks. I mean, from a privacy perspective, my view is mostly assume people will use it. And so internally, like, build some guardrails around it, give them some accessibility, have monitoring, make sure you're watching what people are doing, and then give them the option to use it in a safe environment where you're not putting your private data at risk. And then, the risk of the model effectiveness, and it's and the trust and the model verification that comes with generative AI that's making people not comfortable with really rolling it out. My view here is really walk before you run, make human in the loop, use an internal use case, and then expose it externally to customers afterwards, and then fine tune it. This is what the option you have. You can use a large language model, but then you can fine tune it with instructions, with templates, with your own knowledge base. You'll have better model results, and then you can also create those guardrails with it. And then over time, as the model is performing in a way that's expected, then you can start taking the human out of the loop in some aspects of it after you've developed that kind of critical ability and the metrics and the processes to be able to protect it. And then with biases and models, what Lisa said, you will have a first mover advantage if you're familiar with executing AI generally. Bias is not a new concept in AI. The process is in place to make sure that you don't have bias based on the data that you're inputting and the questions you're asking are not meaningfully different here. And so, I think that's really important. And then I think, the other big main risk here is what would like a lack of moat or competitive risk. And I think using large language models, thinking of them as a differentiator and being creative about how you use them, that's the way to protect yourself. So, those are some of the places where I think you can mitigate risk.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Talent then. Let's really look at this. Obviously, a topic close to my heart. So a report at McKinsey shows that current generative AI and other technologies have the potential to automate work activities that absorb 60 to 70% of employees' times. From a talent perspective, what can we expect regarding job displacement and the upskilling required to thrive in a Gen AI-driven landscape? Sanjeevan, let's start with you, if I may. So, what job displacement can we expect? Obviously, there are industries, and we will come on to industries that will be more impacted than others. But what's your view on the job displacement threat to Gen AI and the upskilling that will be required?
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, anyone that says that there won't be displacement, I think is on the wrong side of that debate, right? I think we all have to accept there absolutely will be an element of job displacement. I think it's still early days to kind of really figure out where that is. There's been loads of narratives externally around certain roles. I think what's been interesting is how the market has shifted, right? So it feels like in the near term, you're hearing a lot about the need to have sort of prompt engineering kind of skill sets, right? And this kind of emergence around how do you sort of fine tune some of the tools and the better the output, it's very much reliant on the nature of the prompt and understanding that context. But actually, I think what will start to happen is I think a lot of that will start to get commoditized as we get sort of more of these enterprise horizontal tools. And while there is a short-term need, because the tools are quite sort of consumer grade and sort of slightly sort of scrappy, a lot of that I think will sort of dissipate, and I think that'll be incorporated. And you're seeing that at the moment with things like DALL-E. You don't have to have very sophisticated prompts for a visual image. It sort of takes a very simple prompt and it converts to a complex prompt, and you get a reasonable kind of visual output compared to, like, let's say Midjourney when that first kind of came on the scene. So I think the skill set you get to then is the classic thing around, it's the idea around how do you combine and understand kind of business context, but really that culture of experimentation and innovation and that curiosity. Because I think the more you can bring together these sort of really diverse skill sets and diverse teams, that's when the magic really happens. Because I think you need to be able to kind of cross-pollinate all these different skills. There's no use having a brilliant prompt engineer that can't sort of, it's like chalk and cheese when they're trying to talk to a commissioner. It's kind of how do you bring these two things together, and how do you make sure you enable these sort of multidisciplinary hybrid teams to then become very, very, successful. I think the key thing with all of this, though, has to be, it's got to be that business context that unlocks the value realization. Without that, you're going down this sort of need for the very technical skills like your prompt engineer or your coders and your developers. And that's only going to be short-lived. It's far more important you can blend that with the business context to really unlock value in a lot of these things.
So, thank you. Saka, your view on this?
So I'll take a particular verticals view because there's so many perspectives across the different verticals. I think, again, in professional services, the going saying is that before people would do, an AI would check, and in the future AI will do, and people will check, right? And it's that flip. So it's a unique vertical once again, in the sense that there's an acute shortage of several of these law, accounting, audit sort of professions. And so what my clients tell me is that unless you're a giant big four, which needs to hire, say, 7,500 or 8,000 accountants just to say every year, just to stay even, the smaller firms will probably move a lot of their folks into higher value activity. So job displacement, they're thinking, will be a constraint to growth, but not to delivery, if that makes sense. If you look at a typical busy season, I mean, because a lot of these firms are cyclical, right? They're making their money in those 3-4 month period, and hiring is at a maximum at that time. So growth won't happen because there just simply aren't that many people. So it's an industry that'll get forced to head into the digital audit of the future. And there are certainly a lot of startups that I'm seeing in the landscape doing just that. Long term is absolutely not sustainable, which is where the upskilling, I think, it becomes a very, very big deal. But yeah, I mean, overall, I agree with a lot of the things Sanjeevan said. My example is particular to the professional services industry. Job displacement seems to be less of a concern for delivery, more of a concern for AI-led growth constraint and prohibitiveness.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa, McKinsey's, again, this report from McKinsey showing that adoption scenarios lead to estimates that half of today's workforce activities could be automated between 2030 and 2060, with a midpoint in 2045. Do you agree with that from what you're seeing?
This is a complex question, so I just want to break it down a little bit more before we get to those percentages. And I also want to clarify that my response represents my own research and views and not that of my employer.
Okay.
Just going back to McKinsey, I really like the way that McKinsey's James Manika categorizes challenge into 3 areas: jobs lost, jobs changed, and jobs gained. So let's start with jobs lost. So there have been reports by McKinsey, there have been reports this year by Goldman Sachs, which actually, they look at the occupations in terms of activities and how those activities can be automated. And those activities largely concern support or administration roles, where over 50%, I think, of those activities lend themselves towards automation. And this could lead to job displacement, especially for roles where a significant, amount of that time is in administration and support. However, today, it's important to note that automation doesn't necessarily equate to jobs lost. In many cases, AI can serve as a complement or co-pilot to human workers. And this falls under the category of jobs changed. And this is the prevalent way of working with generative AI today. And we're seeing the emergence of computer agents across applications. And it is not already taught. It needs to be experimented with and taught. And I've experienced working with a large enterprise business where, 2 individuals were using generative AI for the same goal, but in different ways, and came up with completely different answers. So this still needs training into, the emergence of jobs changed. That said, there's likely to be a need for significant upskilling as the job market evolves. New classes of work will emerge, just as they've done in the past, and this is the category of jobs gained. And the Goldman Sachs report references the work of the economist David Autor, who points out that 85% of employment growth in the US over the past 80 years has actually come from jobs that didn't exist prior. However, the transition may not be smooth for all. and we'll probably see a downward pressure on wages. And in our current cost-cutting environment, it's hard to imagine that businesses won't be tempted to further delayer their structures, removing some degree of middle management, relying more on senior leadership and AI-assisted juniors. And this has been a hypothesis put forward from different sources. Reskilling can be challenging, and there's no guarantee that these new jobs will be created even in the same places where people currently live. The question for me, Nick, is really, are organizations and policymakers taking proactive steps to manage this transition to ensure workers are not left behind? We may experience a very sharp transition.
Interesting. Saka. Sorry, you've come to Beth, finally. Apologies.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, the world is changing, right? And it has been. I think like there's no shortage of problems. A lot of these most manual roles, if they haven't been moved offshore already, there's risk of it. And so, I think, when you're recruiting and thinking about talent and just thinking about my career and how much I've had to evolve as the world has changed, you're looking like for creative problem solvers who can evolve, that are continuous learners, that are problem solvers, right? So that's the type of worker you're looking for. I think in the short-term jobs, there will be some jobs lost and the more meaningful jobs will change. And then over time that you will have the gain. Like I like those three buckets as well. But, I think just being the continuous learning and the training piece has always been really important, and it will just continue to be important. But I think, engineering is a perfect example of a place where, there'll be more efficiency in how you write code, but there'll still have to be people who are thinking about why we're writing code and like what the value it is for it. And I don't think that goes away.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Beth, I'm going to come to you for the next question then. So, there are clearly there's going to be a significant impact across all sectors and industries. I think what's already been identified is that banking, high tech, life sciences, retail, consumer industries are at the top of the list of organizations in sectors that are going to be impacted the greatest. Which organization sectors are actually setting the standards as leaders in Gen AI, and what lessons can others derive from their successful integration practices so far?
I mean, this is the answer based on the lens that I have. And so finance and fintech and healthcare are the two areas that I've spent the most time in. Generally, finance has the most money, right? They have the most dollars at cents today, especially with like the quant funds and the faster moving funds. They will move, the public funds move the fastest. Private equity funds are sometimes the slowest to move, just generally, even though there's a lot of fear of missing out that's happening right now, but they're also kind of, the change management is more difficult there. On the healthcare side, there's meaningful privacy issues. I think the first place we're really focused on is the automation components of things, because you have such an issue with, talent and workers and kind of, people being forced to spend a lot of manual time doing paperwork, and they should be focused on the patient. But, I guess in short, industries with the most money that have to make the decisions the quickest will move first, and they always have with technology.
Saka, your view on that? Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I mean, my big three that I'm noticing, they're the obvious ones of, entertainment, media, retail, some of the creative industries. I'll skip those because we talk about them a lot. But if I look at, some of the things happening in healthcare, the sort of the pioneering use of improving diagnostics and drug discovery and personalized treatment plans from the pharmaceuticals to the hospitals to the acute centers. I mean, there's just you look at something like how IBM Watson has repositioned itself basically as a health offering. I find that some of the points that Beth made about the industries with the money, with the acute problems, are the ones that are going to adopt and drive fast. I also am impressed by what's happening in the legal industry. Again, this comes from the sort of professional services focus that some of our work has. But the legal research and document review work is really, I think, showing a lot of adoption. It has over the last 5-7 years. But I think with Gen AI, you look at firms that are looking at 10K, 10Q, entire taxation, entire audits that conceptualize can you do a digital audit, for example, in the future? And so there's a lot of trend setting going on. And the third one I would mention is, we have a global NGO client, and you don't think NGO as sort of harbingers of grand tech, but there are some unique problem spaces that they tackle with. So for example, if an entire country doesn't have the right infrastructure to provide accurate credit scoring, it's extraordinary the leverage of AI to figure that out by marrying it out with, say, telco data or FMCG data, which introduces all kinds of risk and ethical and explainability and transparency issues. But they are setting a standard of industries that are developing entire ecosystems of sort of data partners and data partnerships in order to leverage some of these technologies to do something as simple as credit scoring. So healthcare, legal, global NGO, education, I think, you look at some of the Duolingo, Coursera stuff and all of the generation that's happening there. Really, really interesting stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think everything Beth mentioned on spot, and some of these industries is where I'm seeing the maximum traction.
Great, thank you. Sanjeevan, media. Embracing.
Yeah, it's been quite interesting.
Yeah.
No, it's been really interesting. So I think when I look at other sectors, I think I agree with pharma in that what you're seeing there is in terms of drug discovery and early on in terms of IP pipelines and some of the patent pipelines, that there's a lot of applications there. Similar with media entertainment, because I think we're very much an IP sort of creation and exploitation kind of business. There's a lot of innovation around sort of how might we think about new forms of IP, where's that created, how might that get exploited. So there's a lot of work in that sort of space. But the other one that's really interesting for me is sort of all the sort of what I would describe as fee-based companies, so consultancies, the law firms. There's a lot of innovation there, and even some of the large consultancy firms have used a lot of client outputs, ran a sort of foundation model across it. And the model that seems to be emerging is that they're moving away from the kind of an hourly rate kind of model, but much more investing in kind of business outcomes, experience of implementation, and they're sort of shifting the way they can provide that services. It feels like they're going like at a higher order level. I'm seeing that both across law firms, but also your classical kind of strat consulting firms that are really shifting the way they think about the usage of sort of content creation and pack generation that was quite time intensive, and moving much more where allowing consultants to spend a lot more time with clients and helping them to drive that sort of last mile adoption of transformation programs. So there's a real shift in the market that I'm certainly seeing. And the key themes are, the classic things seem to be like the human in the loop seems to be critical across all of those industries, right? They're using this whole idea, it's augmentation, it's not autopilot. That seems to be like a consistent theme around how they're shifting and innovating their business models.
Interesting. Lisa, your view on this, please.
I'll add a perspective from the tech sector itself, which has been very much at the forefront of adopting generative AI. So Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, Meta, NextDLP. And these firms are following the following practices. They're using cross-functional teams and data management, a cross-functional team in order to bring the diverse backgrounds that we have discussed already on this panel, connecting the technical to the business, as Sanjeevan has pointed out. And these businesses are also drilled at harnessing and leveraging data, which is now made a lot easier with generative AI. The challenge for legacy businesses is to get their data estate in order and then apply large AI models as platforms. The second aspect that they are doing very well is integration and scaling. These companies are now integrating new technologies within existing systems, scaling AI solutions into existing products and workflows. The third point is bias, fairness, and ethics. These organizations are all making sure that data handling practice complies with relevant regulations and ethical standards. The fourth point is verification and testing, so implementing a rigorous verification and testing strategy to ensure the reliability and accuracy of AI systems, thereby building the trust in the technology. And the fifth point, which is not to be underestimated, is talent acquisition and management. So these companies are actively reorganizing their operating models to allocate resources into new roles, including compliance and ethics. And they are hiring at speed talent in this area.
Fantastic. Right, we have 5 minutes left. The final question is, what is the one critical success factor that organizations should consider when contemplating adoption and integrating generative AI into their strategies and their processes? So if you could each give me one sentence with one answer, that would be the perfect ending to this fantastic discussion. Lisa, I'm going to start with you, as I started with you at the start.
My one point is the criticality of human partnership with technology and process changes needs to be understood. Incorporating AI is fundamentally about empowering people to do their best work and make the next best decision.
Thank you. Beth, actually, I realized I started with you, but I'm going to come to you next anyway. Thank you. What's your one answer to this? Just need to unmute, Beth. Sorry. Apologies.
Thank you. I made it the whole way without doing that. I appreciate it. No, listen, it's hard. I have 2 answers. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna, you know, like Lisa's answer is absolutely true. Like, this is human plus machine. It's really about the collaboration. It's about process. It's about, you know, integrating the technology to make the situation better. And then the other one, and I spoke about this earlier, it's just about quantifying the real vision and also the real costs. So like, you know, a true longer term vision of ROI, I think, is that, you know, what's the difference between success and failure with many of these projects.
Yeah. Thank you. Sanjeevan.
Yeah, I think if you look at the market and as everyone adopts this, there's going to be another leveling, right? Everyone's going to get this productivity gain. So for me, I think it's around organization agility. So what is this kind of the speed at which the learning cycles are taking place within the organization? So I think in time that becomes the competitive differentiator. And I think that's the bit that often is quite clunky in traditional businesses and takes time to unlock. That for me, once you get this leveling, when everyone's using generative and there is no competitive differentiator, becomes the single most defining point around the ones that break away and the others that sort of just, you know, a BAU kind of business.
Thank you. And last but not least, Saka.
Yeah, that's I tie it back to question number 1, which is really the role of leadership and the role of the board and the role of the LT. You know, I think there's a sense that the world is changing and that the future of work is changing and in many ways has changed. But to really integrate that thinking into investments is probably still farther away than I'd love to see. So the cost of not doing is greater than the cost of failing, as in cost of doing, really needs to be understood at the highest levels of leadership. This is an existential issue for a lot of companies. And because your KPIs are so finance driven at the LT and at the board level, that shift at the LT, at the strategic level, I think is an absolutely critical factor in any of this. Everything we talk about, whether it be data, whether it be talent, whether it be, you know, experimentation and B2B enterprise robustness, none of that happens until the board and the leadership is squarely in place. And for a lot of the progressive firms and the leaders that we have on this call, that may be the case, but it is not the case in many others as well. And I think I'd just like to leave it on that note. That to me is the single biggest point of failure or success going forward.
And that's a perfect note to finish on. Saka in San Francisco, Beth in New York, Sanjeevan and Lisa in London. Thank you very much for joining us on this panel today. Thank you to our panelists who've really contributed to a fantastic discussion. And to those that have attended, thank you for joining us. I will be running this webinar again for APAC next week, after which we'll be sharing the collaboration of the insight from this report. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. We are finishing at the top of the hour. I'm very pleased about that. Thank you very much to all. Have a great day. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye-bye.